Today I'd like to talk about your saxophone piece, Low. It flows in a way that's narrative in form, at least to my ears. And it feels like there's something behind the music that is more than meets the ear. And it's quite short. It's only about 6 minutes, but there's so much to it.
My process for this piece, I started analyzing a song from Jeff Buckley, very famous singer-songwriter of the 90s. I liked a lot the way he improvised and the way he would use some techniques. And it was also very influenced by another piece for saxophone by Giacinto Scelsi. Mm-hmm. When I started this piece, I based it off a song of Jeff Buckley. The song is Lover, You Shouldn't Come Over. And I started actually transcribing by ear. And I noticed how he used a lot of growling, a lot of, I would call it bisbigliando. I mean, the way I interpreted in the saxophone piece is bisbigliando. Mm-hmm. He used to take a note and keep the note changing slightly the timbre or the intonation. Sometimes it was almost microtonal runs. Like he was doing runs microtonally. Sometimes it was even less than that, so it was more a change of timbre than an actual change of pitch. And he would modulate his voice in a way that always was very captivating for me. And I saw a lot of similarities in a way in which the saxophone can produce the sound. And I actually analyzed the lyrics. I found many emotions and I tried to regroup them in a way. I think I found like 6 kind of emotions, 3 more in a positive side and 3 more in a negative side.
When I look at this piece score-wise and when I hear it, I don't know who Jeff Buckley is. I'm not familiar with the music, but I don't need to know that a particular songwriter to appreciate the piece, which I really like about this piece because you can tell that there's something going on underneath the surface. You don't know what it is, but you also don't need to know what it is to appreciate the piece.
I was influenced by the emotional content of the lyrics, but it's not like the piece is going like verse after verse in parallel with the song. It's not like that. What I did is I associated at every emotion that I found in the piece some elements of the range, of the dynamics, of the articulations. In the first one, there is the emotions that I found in the lyrics. In the second one, there are the register that I thought I would use for the gestures, and I will talk about how I found those gestures. And in the third one, there are like the dynamics that I chose to use for every of this emotion character. I would call it character.
Yeah, and for self-hatred, it makes sense. You have forte to fortissimo.
Timbre and articulation, yeah, and the type of the length. Yeah, because I forgot it is in Italian mostly. So valori lunghi, it means like long, and also the control. I'm trying to set up the idea of the gestures that I would improvise and then choose for the piece. I kind of put my boundaries because I didn't want to go all the way because I didn't want those gestures to be too similar to each other. So I did this kind of graphs to say, okay, how should be this kind of gesture, what should be the register, what should be the dynamics, the length of the notes, and of course the pitches. When I say 100% control, it means it has to be very controlled in a way that there isn't much room for improvisation.
But when you say control, I mean, are you talking about the pitch? Because to me, when a saxophone plays, to hold a steady pitch, it's a very intentional thought because the saxophone, the embouchure could change a lot. Is that what you mean by control? Or you mean, because you have one that says 20%. I mean, that's like, what does that even mean, on the saxophone?
Yeah, no, that's more about the type of improvisation, the type of gestures.
Okay.
Because it was inspired by Jeff Buckley way of improvise, because sometimes it would go very wild. So when I talk about control, I mean, if the level of control is low, it means it's a wild part.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you have Daydream as 100%, but then you have something like Desire as 80%. I think that's interesting. I would have thought Daydream would have been less, but I'm curious to hear what this is like in terms of the actual piece too.
To be completely honest, I don't actually remember exactly because it's been like 5 years.
But it's great to show this process though, because I feel like oftentimes to an outsider, it's just like, okay, this music came just down at some point and it just wrote itself. in a way. I mean, that's how, like the classical composers, romantic composers are depicted, but, that's not how it's done at all.
Yes, but as I said, this was a way to set some boundaries for me, because, I mean, boundaries can be your best friends and can be the best way to actually unleash your fantasy.
Yeah, but also when you're putting yourself boundaries, sometimes you have to do that intentionally. Because at least I find when I'm composing a piece, I am so lost in it that I forget about some of the boundaries. Because it's not like I have a bunch of things in front of me saying, okay, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. A lot of it is you write a graph like this, I feel like, and then you go write the piece. It's not like you have the graph like on your wall there, and you're making sure that you follow every single thing that you did, right? I mean, it's just there as part of your subconscious as you're writing the piece.
Yes, I mean, for me it was a way to start the piece, because once I had this setup of pitches and everything, I just started to write the piece in a way that I would focus on these gestures.
So like this page here that we're looking at is just a compilation of these improvised gestures you're talking about, based on the hope, desire, self-pity, etc., descriptors, right?
Yes,
and
yes, exactly.
You would kind of draw from this page as kind of a sketch, right? I'm assuming.
Yes, every note of the piece came from these gestures, except from a little quote of the actual song. Towards the end, probably no one would guess that is from the song, unless someone is a very hardcore fan of Jeff Buckley.
Yeah, someone.
But yes,
yeah, exactly. You're talking about all the different emotions, and then now you have to write the piece.
Yes.
So when you're writing the piece and you're putting it on paper, you're putting it into Sibelius or whatever you're using, and you have these different emotions in mind, did you already know what order they were going to be in? I think you mentioned you didn't know what order they would be in.
So when I was writing this piece, I thought that I would use the structure of the song. But then after a bit, I decided that when the piece was taking its own form, I decided to not hung up on that. Do you say that in English?
Not to get hung up on the actual order
on
of the lyrics in the song.
Yeah, to be exact the same of the song, because that was the initial idea. But then I realized that the piece was going to another direction, because I've already had the material. I've already put the first section on paper, like as it is now. And when I started composing the second section, at a certain point, I would choose the gestures that I had written, but without being particularly attentive to the exact order that I thought at the beginning, because I would be forcing myself to do that. And I just wanted to take advantage of the fact that at some point, when the piece was already, I would say, half written, I would just roll with that.
To me, when I was listening to this, you have this subtone thing, which you're basically playing around that same E flat D sound, and you get that kind of bispliando effect, that effect where it almost sounds like you're whispering. But then the first page, it's also the same sort of thing, but you're doing it with changing fingerings, right? With the 0, 1, 0, 3, 2.
The important thing is that there is a slight differentiation of timbre during the figures, so it doesn't have to be something blatant. It's just something very subtle.
Do you care so much, like, okay, 0 is the bass G, and then 1 is slightly higher, and then 2 is slightly higher than that, or it doesn't matter as long as they sound different than as long as all four sound different from each other, you're fine?
Yes.
And then you move on to the subtone section. And then to me, this is a really magical section, because you start going to the bottom end of the alto saxophone, and the subtone sound makes it even lower. And to me, I'm not even sure exactly what's happening with this section. I'm wondering how is this being achieved, this kind of sound, and what do you mean exactly by a subtone?
Subtone is a technique that is widely used by saxophonists, especially in jazz. The technical way of describing it is every note has a fundamental and his partials. When you play subtone, it's like you are excluding all the partials and playing only the fundamental. If you have a filter that takes out all the upper partials and you just have the fundamental, especially on the low register, because it's the register of the fundamental of the instrument.
And then you have this like -4 over here. What does that exactly mean when you have -4 over the dyad that you have over here?
Yes, we usually name the keys with numbers. So it would go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. So -4, it means take out the finger from the keyboard, and it would sound slightly different, but it wouldn't change.
I also find this piece like fascinating because when you go from one section to the next, there are a lot of different extended techniques, but they don't feel out of place at all. They feel like they belong in the piece, and you use them also so often in each section that they just become part of the soundscape, and you don't even think of them as extended techniques anymore.
Yes, I mean, that was my goal. As someone that studied saxophone in conservatory, I had to play contemporary pieces that would use extended techniques, as it was a catalog of effects, rather than just an instrument, a tool, an expressive tool to convey an idea or a sentiment or whatever you are trying to convey when you write music. It can be anything. For me, I think I just used Quasi Slap. That doesn't really mean much, but slap is a very strong attack and very dry. But in this case, it's not the actual slap.
Are you talking about the slapping of the actual keys, or are you talking about?
No, it's an articulation. It's a technique of the tongue. It takes the name from the technique of the double bass. So the slap is very percussive and dry attack on the saxophone. Quasi slap means almost that.